Welcome to the Piedmont Triad Podcast.
Before I get too old, I'm gonna head down to Muscle Shoals. Baby, you can meet me at the station.
Welcome to another episode of the Piedmont Triad Podcast, the only podcast that talks about the strange and unusual people and places of the North Carolina Piedmont Triad area. I'm your host, David Locklear, and today we are talking with John Holley, a local authority on Floyd Council, one of the musical inspirations that rock band Pink Floyd derived their name from. Legend has it that Pink Floyd founding member Syd Barrett changed the band's name early in the 60s after he glimpsed two albums he owned by two blues artists. One was South Carolina's Pinckney Pink Anderson and North Carolina's Floyd Council. Combining their two names, the legendary Pink Floyd emerged and left their mark on the musical world. John Holley has long been a fan of the blues and rock music, and over the years he has amassed a wealth of knowledge about Floyd Council, and he was kind enough to take a little bit of time to share with us what he has learned about this amazing local legend over the years. He tells us about the multiple attempts by enthusiasts trying to pinpoint Floyd Council's unmarked grave in Sanford, North Carolina, how Pink Floyd originally called themselves the T-Sets before, thankfully, changing their name, and how the city of Sanford and Floyd Council's own son worked to keep his father's legacy alive. Jump right in. The way I came across your name was not long ago. I had been doing some reading, and I can't remember what website it was on, but it was on a website, and I saw where it told about how Syd Barrett of one of the original members of Pink Floyd, that the way he came up with the name Pink Floyd was between one of the bluesmen in South Carolina, Pink Anderson, I believe.
That's correct, Pink Anderson.
And Floyd Council. And so when I did a little bit of research, I found an article, and it mentioned your name, and you were talking about in the article how a lot of people will come to Sanford, North Carolina, which is where Floyd Council was from. Or not where he's from, but where he lived when he died, and you were talking about it. So I was just wanting to see if I could bend your ear a little bit and get a little more information about Floyd Council and his very historic attachment to one of the greatest, in my opinion, one of the greatest rock bands of all time, and it just happens to be down the road, and I'm close to 50 years old, and I never, ever knew this. I feel like a terrible fan.
Well, I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan and a huge blues fan. So yeah, I was excited when I learned about this several years ago, and yeah, I'll be glad to tell you whatever I know. I'll be glad to pass on to you.
Okay. Well, yeah. So one of the things I saw that Sanford had done not too long ago was a mural project that was sort of a tribute to Floyd Council. Can you elaborate on that? Can you tell me a little bit more about how that came about?
Yeah, so several years ago, the city of Sanford kind of went on this venture of painting these murals. They have this, I don't know if it's publicly funded or they raise the money privately, but they'll get enough money and then they'll decide on the topic and they'll paint these murals all over the city on the side of buildings. And they're really beautiful, professionally done murals, and they really changed the entire outlook of downtown Sanford. And the latest project they had was a memorial to Pink Anderson and Floyd Council and their connection to Pink Floyd. And it is actually painted on the side of a building that you can see from Carthage Street in Sanford. And back during the spring, they had a dedication, if you will, to the mural. And it was an all-day kind of a blues festival that was at the Depot Park, which is literally right around the corner. So they had this blues festival and dedication to this mural on the same day, and it was a great turnout. Floyd Council Jr., who still lives in Sanford, actually came to the event, as did Pink Anderson Jr. I don't know if he's actually a junior, but it's Pink Anderson's son. And Floyd Jr. and Pink Jr. had never met, but they met for the first time at this music festival, and both of them got up on stage and actually played along with a couple of the bands.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
I got to meet both of them. Both of them are super cool individuals. I actually have met Floyd Jr. several times over the last few years. He actually met me and another guy before this mural project got off. We met Floyd Jr., myself and a guy named Guy Unger. Guy is a professional musician. He has a music business in Fayetteville called the Fayetteville Music Collective, and he actually taught Floyd Jr. Guitar lessons way back in the day. So he says, "Hey, I still got Floyd Jr.'s phone number." So we called him up, and he met us out at his father's grave site, which is off of Lower Moncure Road in Sanford. But unfortunately, the grave site is an old African American graveyard. The church has long since been destroyed and torn down, and the graveyard is completely overrun by woods and trees and brush. And there are just dozens and dozens of graves in the middle of the woods, and you can't identify, because he didn't have a tombstone, you can't identify which one is actually Floyd Sr. You know, his son can tell you, he's right in this general area right here, but you can't really pinpoint the exact area. So we were hoping to pinpoint the grave and do a little fundraiser, maybe a little placard, but that fell through when we couldn't get the grave site located. And so the city of Sanford kind of got involved, and then they kind of took the idea of the mural, and it ran from there, and finally was the dream came true, and to some of our local fans, and that's where the mural stands today. It's a beautiful mural. If anybody's in Sanford, you can ride down the area of Carthage Street and you can see it from the road, and it's an awesome mural.
Well, that's a shame about the gravestone. I would imagine, just from my perspective, if one of my parents passed away, I would be really aggravated at the idea that I wouldn't be able to visit a resting site, nothing officially set out. And I had read that an organization called the Killer Blues Headstone Project had, I guess they had tried to put up a commemorative headstone for Floyd Council. Is that correct?
Yeah, I am familiar. There have been several groups that have gone out and tried to do some research to actually locate the actual grave. And like I said, Floyd Jr. can get you within, probably 25 feet of where it is, but there's just several grave sites there. There was a group several years ago, I cannot remember their name, but they actually posted some videos on YouTube where they went out with a crew of volunteers with chainsaws and weed eaters and tried to clear out some of the brush and see if that would help any. But unfortunately, I just don't know any way possible without, exhuming bodies, how you could actually pinpoint the grave. So, yeah, it is a shame that the graveyard was allowed to get into the condition it's in, but that's, many, many, many years ago. And this is just, I guess, what happened.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then tell me a little bit about yourself. You're one of the main people that I bumped into besides Floyd Council Jr. I did try to get in touch with him, and I don't know if I have the right information or not. So I might paw at you a little bit after this interview to see if you would see if he'd be interested in talking to me as well. But but yeah, so how did you kind of become, a bit of an expert in this arena to the point that you were being quoted in a newspaper article and whatnot? I found that completely fascinating. You must really enjoy the music.
I honestly don't know how that happened. How my name, you're not the first one to call, but somehow my name got floated out there. The only thing I know is, I was born in the mid-'60s. Raised in the 70s and early 80s as far as my music. I play the guitar a little bit. I'm a huge fan of the blues. My father was from the Mississippi Delta and joined the military when he was 18 and wound up here in North Carolina, and that's where I was born and raised. But he had 12 brothers and sisters. And so since the day I was born, I've spent a lot of time in the Delta of Mississippi. That's kind of my second home. And of course, if you know anything about the Mississippi Delta, that's where the Mississippi Delta blues, Robert Johnson, Son House, Muddy Waters, even B.B. King, is from Mississippi. That's where that kind of blues originated, or is at least credited with being originated from. And then when it seeped over into North Carolina, they started calling it the Carolina Blues or Carolina Bluesmen. And so many years ago, I was back to my friend Guy Unger. He's a professional musician. He actually runs a music school in Fayetteville called the Fayetteville Music Collective. He is one of the most incredible guitar players, has an incredible band. His wife and is a professional musician. I mean, these guys really know their stuff. And I heard him tell this story at an event he was playing at. And when I first heard the story, I thought, I'm sure I was born and raised in Sanford. I've never heard this, and I'm one of the biggest Pink Floyd fans on earth. And I surely would have known this. So I believe somebody probably give Guy some misinformation, or he misunderstood, or something was my initial reaction. And then I started doing some online research, and I thought, well, wow, this is really true. And then I heard a radio interview with Nick Mason, the founding member and drummer of Pink Floyd, and he confirmed the story on the radio interview. And I was just fascinated and just blown away that most people, even Pink Floyd fans in this area, did not know this connection between Sanford in North Carolina and one of the most iconic rock bands on planet Earth, and at least in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So I kind of, started talking to people about it, and then I believe the first person to call me to do a story was a local publication called The Rant, and a guy named Gordon Anderson is a reporter for the local the Rant, and he called me up and did a story on it, and I guess he kind of quoted me in an article, and for some reason, I guess when you get online, you're online forever. So I've had a couple of people call me over the years about what I knew about this because I was quoted in that article. But it is a fascinating story, and I'm sure you've done your research on how that came about. And if you don't know exactly, I'll be glad to tell you at least my understanding of it.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I've read about it, but yeah, I'd love to hear you say about it.
So it's my understanding is that, in the early '60s, the original members of Pink Floyd were led by, Syd Barrett was the original singer, started the band along with Nick Mason, Roger Waters, and there were a couple more that kind of came and went in those early days. And they went through several names. I can't remember some of the other names, but the one that they had at the time they decided on Pink Floyd, they were called the Tea-Set. Now, they're British and they're from England, and, British like their tea. Yeah. So they were called the Tea-Set. And they were set to perform, in my understanding, they were set to perform at a music event with several other bands. And when they got there, or shortly before they arrived, they were informed that there was another band called the Tea-Set. And the other band had the name first. And so they were in a scramble to try to come up with a new name kind of on the spot, if you will. And so Syd Barrett had these two blues albums from these two Carolina bluesmen, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. And he just kind of, in a moment of thought, he just juxtaposed the two first names, Pink Floyd. And I believe that they were originally called, you may have to fact check me on this, but I believe they were originally called the Pink Floyd Sound.
I have heard that before. Yeah.
Yeah. So they kind of grabbed this name kind of as a kind of a last minute kind of thing from these two albums from these two Carolina bluesmen, and they ended up dropping the sound and just became Pink Floyd, and it just the rest is kind of history. But my understanding is that Floyd Council was actually born up around Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and at an early age, he, I think maybe in his late teens or early 20s, migrated down towards Sanford, which is just a few miles away. And he actually lived out the remainder of his life in or around Sanford. And like I said, his family, including his son, still live here. And he's buried out off Lower Moncure Road, which is just, he's buried maybe 4 or 5 miles outside the city of Sanford. So that's kind of how the story goes, at least how I've been able to do my research, and that's how I've been able to. The best story that I can come up with is how this started. But like I said, you can find interviews with particularly Nick Mason and some of the original members, that where they do talk about this and confirm that that's kind of how it happened.
Yeah, I saw that in a couple of spots, and it would be a dream of mine to be like, "Hey, Nick Mason, could you come on my show and talk about this?"
Oh, man.
I think he'd be hard to get a hold of, though.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Either him. Now, I'm a guitar player, so David Gilmour is my my guy. Of course, I love the whole band, but I'm really fascinated by David Gilmour, who was also heavily influenced by those old blues. If you look at modern rock or classic rock, I mean, almost all of those bands were influenced by those early Mississippi Delta blues kind of music. Eric Clapton, Prince, David Gilmour of Pink Floyd, they all kind of give great influence to this style of music, in their writings and in their recordings. I was fortunate enough when I was a kid to be able to be exposed to this simply because of the part of the country that my father came from. And I've cherished it ever since. I listen to any genre of music you can. I literally listen to everything from Beethoven to Tupac. I mean, and everything in between. I'm a huge music fan, and I love anything that's got some great lyrics and great guitar in it. I'll be glad to listen to.
Yeah,
and,
I'm kind of the same way. I've really enjoyed. I love the blues as well, and I've always leaned way more towards the old Delta blues sound. Like when you were mentioning Sun House earlier, I've managed to get my hands on. Only a handful of these were printed, but it was a CD in the 90s that it was called like the Complete Library of Congress recordings of Sun House. And there was even a recording on there where you could hear, apparently his house was next to a train track, and you can hear while he's in the middle of playing the song, a train goes by.
Wow.
I loved it because it's like, it was very raw, and it was like, in a weird way, I felt like I was in the room with him. And I think that kind of connected with me spiritually, and I was just kind of off to the races after that.
Yeah, I can remember when, this is almost 40 years ago, way before the internet and cell phones and all this other stuff, going to my local library, and they had videos, instructional videos of literally on any topic you could think of. And I can remember checking out a video on how to play Robert Johnson style blues. And I took it home and I actually rechecked it out 2 or 3 times and tried to learn some of those old school blues from a videotape many, many years ago. So it's had a great influence on me and what type of music I really like. And, when we talk about Pink Floyd, at least from my perspective, you can clearly hear some of those blues influences in a lot of David Gilmour's solos. And, they're almost, like you said a while ago, you mentioned a spiritual, when I listen to some of David Gilmour stuff, it is a kind of a spiritual thing. It's otherworldly almost, and it kind of mesmerizing. And I can hear that influence from those old school blues. I've actually been to Robert Johnson's gravesite just outside Greenwood, Mississippi on tour.
That's somewhere I need to make like a Mecca to. I mean, sorry, a travel to. Listen to me. I need to learn words.
Yeah, I've been to the Crossroads, which I can't remember that highway in Mississippi. There's an actual, of course, it's a major intersection today, but back in the Robert Johnson, if you remember the story, Robert Johnson supposedly went through the Crossroads at midnight and sold his soul to the devil in exchange for learning how to play the guitar really well.
Right.
And, that's another fascinating story. And so the devil allegedly made him this great guitar player. And then as soon as he achieved fame, he was killed.
Yeah.
He was allegedly poisoned by a jealous husband who Robert was kind of making a play for his wife. And allegedly he was poisoned and died there in Greenwood, Mississippi. So, there's just, these blues have these great stories attached to them. And you could go off on any one of those tangents and just spend hours and hours talking about, this or that or the other. Almost all of your classic rock in one way or the other is linked to those old school blues players back in the day.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you can really hear it. And when I listen to just almost any rock, you can hear where the blues come through, and it makes sense why it comes through that way, is because the blues was basically a type of music where it was for mostly people who were really, really down on their luck. Like it's not happy music when you look at the lyrical content of a lot of it. It's very, very sad music. And so, rock and roll was sort of born out of the idea that, we were rebelling and smashing windows and things like that. And so it was almost like a strange evolution from being sad to now we're angry about it kind of thing. And I love hearing history like that.
Yeah. And that's a pretty cool analogy. I've never thought about it, but you're exactly right. I've often, if you watch the movie Crossroads, one of the main characters said, the blues is nothing but a good man feeling bad. And that's kind of where the blues, you don't play the blues, you feel the blues. And if you feel it, it just comes out, that people enjoy it.
Right.
So it's pretty fascinating stuff. And the Carolina bluesmen, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council, they were the same style, if you will, maybe a little bit of differences, but the Delta blues, when it kind of migrated this way, that's kind of, you can hear in Floyd Council, his old stuff, and Pink Anderson, it's clearly the same style as that old Mississippi Delta blues, your Robert Johnsons and stuff like that, Muddy Waters and Son House. Pretty amazing that, these guys, they obtained some fame themselves a little bit, maybe locally, but they, at least Pink and Floyd, are connected to, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, one of the world's most iconic bands. Not only influenced their playing, like David Gilmour's playing, but also their name literally came from these guys.
It's wild to me that so many people don't know this. Like, I was stunned that I didn't know it. And of course, the first thing that popped into my head when I read this was that I was thinking about the song Have a Cigar, where they're like, which one's Pink? I was like, holy shit. They actually, there is one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And, I'll like I said, I have not seen Floyd Jr. since the music festival back in the early spring. But he is still around and still kicking and still, happy to talk about his father. Came out to that music festival. And so, I don't have his number, but I think I can get in a contact that does. And I would love to hear, him on your show. I can remember when we met him at the gravesite that day. My friend Guy was talking to him about, what kind of father was he? Was he, and he talked about him being a great father. The kids loved him. He was a family man, and he had fond memories of his childhood with his father. And sometimes in the music business, especially with people that gain fame and fortune, sometimes you hear a lot of tragic stories about their family lives and their relationship with their family. But according to Floyd Council, he was a great father, a great family man, and they all loved him and miss him very much. And he's happy to talk about those kind of things. At least he was when I talked to him.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear too, because you're right. It's more often than not, the reason people are really good at creating very sort of spiritually moving artwork, whether it's music or painting, sculpting, whatever, usually it comes with tragedy. Like, it's born out of sort of a coping mechanism. So that's awesome, right, that he was a good dad. I like that's refreshing, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. If you contrast that, I don't know how much you know about Robert Johnson, but if you contrast that with Robert Johnson had a child. I believe it was a son, and he had very little to do with the son because the mother of the child died when the child was very young and went to the mother's parents, his grandparents, to raise. And Robert Johnson tried to visit his son on a couple of occasions, and the family believed that his music was the devil's music, and they didn't want anything to do with it, and didn't want him to have anything to do with his son. And you can actually, I believe, find some interviews with Robert Johnson's son saying, I only have one or two memories of my father because my grandparents and my extended family believed that, this was not a good life for me to be exposed to this kind of stuff and this kind of music. And it's a pretty tragic ending for Robert and his son.
Yeah, that's really sad too, because
it
almost sounds like he was trying in a way, but that's a bummer.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so when I heard this from Floyd Jr. about, his dad being a great dad and he was around and he was involved and he loved us and we loved him, it was pretty good feeling, a feel good story,
Now, see, when I was when I was reading about this, I tried to go and find some places where they might have Floyd Council's music available, and it looks like the main place is YouTube where you can find this stuff. Do you have any physical copies of his music?
I do not have any physical copies. All of the Pink Anderson or Floyd music that I have been exposed to have been online, been on YouTube. Okay. And I suppose you might contact whoever uploaded his videos and see what they have. But I've not done any research for it, to try to find any either. I've got a cousin that's in the music business up in Nashville trying to break into country music, and a couple years ago, they gave me one of their new albums, and it was literally a vinyl album. Apparently vinyl is making a comeback, and they gave me this album. I said, man, I don't have anything to play this on. I don't even know where to get a record player anymore. So even if I could find some of the old original albums, I don't know. I'd have to go find something to play the album, everything's digital these days,
Yeah, and records like that are going to be worth a lot of money, most likely, because I remember trying to look up any physical copies of Robert Johnson, and I think there's only a handful in the world, and they're going for thousands of dollars, and I don't have that kind of money lying around.
Yeah, I don't either. But yeah, if you had one in your possession, you'd certainly have a little retirement nest egg there.
Yeah, that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be. It absolutely would be, because they're just so rare.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of the basics of what I know about the story, and like I said, Pink Floyd and particularly David Gilmour have influenced my guitar playing, and if you were to listen to me play, if you would just play a simple backing track and tell me to play a lead in A minor or whatever, you would definitely, if you were a Pink Floyd fan, be able to pick out those. Well, that's a David Gilmour riff. You'd be able to pick out those kind of riffs. And David Gilmour, I believe, inherited a lot of that from, Pink Anderson, Floyd Council, Muddy Waters, Robert Johnson, and all those guys. So, it's just history. Just following the next generation and the next generation.
Yeah.
We change it a little bit. We kind of tune it a little bit, and we add a little bit of distortion and electronics and that kind of stuff. But the heart and soul of it's still alive today.
So is the blues scene around Sanford, is it, I would imagine that it's kind of at least a very obvious thing in Sanford. I've never actually been to Sanford, but I would think that a blues scene coming from such a legendary blues player would be almost a given if you came into town and wanted to hear some blues music.
Well, it's not as prominent as you would think. I don't really think that the younger generation today, even though what they listen to was heavily influenced by the blues, I don't really think they listen to a lot of the old school blues. There is some around. I don't even know if they're in existence anymore, but there was a local band called FOG, the Fog Band, and FOG stood for Four Old Guys. And these four old guys, the Fog Band, would get together, and they were a straight up blues band. Played a lot of B.B. King, Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of stuff, and you could find them playing locally pretty regularly up until 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago maybe. I hadn't seen them. I don't even know if they are still playing together, but you can find a little bit of blues around Sanford. But it's more prominent, I believe, up around Fayetteville and in the Chapel Hill area You can find some clearly some blues venues. I will throw out this. I don't know if you've ever heard of a female artist. She's gained a little bit of notoriety in the last several years. Her name is Samantha Fish. Have you ever heard of her?
I don't think so, no.
Yeah, you should look her up on YouTube. Now, Samantha has evolved over the years, and she's added keyboards and some horns. But when she started playing these old Delta blues and putting her spin on it, she was only like 16, 17 years old. She's from out around, I believe she's down around St. Louis area, and I've seen her 2 or 3 times here in North Carolina. I'm a huge fan. You or any of your listeners, just go on YouTube and type in, search for Samantha Fish, I Put a Spell on You. I don't know if you remember that old blues song, I Put a Spell on You. She absolutely kills it. And she puts her little twist on it, and it just comes out fabulous. And I was a huge fan of hers, especially in the early days when it was just a trio. She's a phenomenal guitar player. So it's her, a drummer, and a bass player. And just those 3 were actually just killing the blues and doing a great job. And she's kind of evolved over the years. Like I said, she's added keyboards and horns, and it's kind of still has the blues heart and soul to it, but you just put a little spin on it. But yeah, you can do a little research, but you can find, some of these younger folks now are starting to come back to some of those blues. And, they understand the connection between modern music and where it all started, and those kinds of things. But blues are a little bit around Sanford, but they're not really that prominent as like you said, as you would think. But that may change, because this story about Floyd Council and Pink Anderson really has only come to the public eye in the last, maybe, I want to say the last 4 or 5 years. There were some people around but it really wasn't written about or radio, being on an iPod, podcast, or people really talking about it up until just the last few years. And now that this mural's come along, the local paper's done stories on it, and the Rant has done stories on it, and radio interviews and those kinds of things, people are really starting to pick up on the story, and it's kind of gained some legs in the last few years.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt when I discovered this. I've lived here all my life, and I was like, as much marijuana as I smoked and as much Pink Floyd as I listened to while I was doing it, how in the world did I not know that its namesake came from a local area? I was startled. And this is one of the good things about the internet, is you find all this very unusual trivia, and the fact that so many weird things actually have been existing or currently exist in North Carolina was part of the reason I started this podcast, was because I was like, there are some weird things out here. And this was right up my alley when I read that. It's like, Pink Floyd, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah. So if you're interested one day, if you want to take a day trip and come down, I'll actually take you out to the graveyard. I'll be glad to show you the graveyard if you're interested one day, or any of your listeners want to come down. But like I said, you can't pinpoint the actual grave, but I can get you in the general area of where he's. And we still are hoping one day to put one of those little highway markers, on the side of the road, graveyard where so and so's buried, and, blah blah blah. But that you talk about the weirdness and the history that kind of connected you to North Carolina. I'm the same way with Mississippi. When I was growing up, I heard all these stories. A lot of historical stuff come out of Mississippi. Robert Johnson gravesite, the Crossroads, the plane crash that killed Leonard Skinner. The band members of Leonard Skinner occurred in Mississippi. So actually, as much time as I spend in Mississippi, I've never been to that crash site. And I understand there's a huge memorial there now. And my uncle, Larry Holly, actually sent me some pictures of the memorial that was erected a few years ago. And so on my next trip out, that's one of my first stops is to the crash site where the band Leonard Skinner crashed in Mississippi. It's just a lot of history there. The Crossroads with Robert Johnson is probably one of the most fascinating stories I ever heard. And of course, I don't believe that he actually sold himself to the devil. Sold his soul to the devil. But if you go back and listen to some of those old musicians that entertained Robert Johnson before, they will tell you he was horrific. He used to get up on stage during their breaks, say, "Hey, can I play a couple songs while you guys are on a break?" And they would literally have to run him off the stage because he was so terrible. And then he left. They kind of run him off, and he said, "I'm going to be back one day." And he was gone 6, 8, 9 months. And when he came back, he was literally off the charts good.
Yeah.
And some of these old musicians talk about there is no way, it is not physically possible to learn to play that good in just 6 to 9 months. There has to be something else here.
Yeah.
And so the story goes is that, the something else is the devil.
And I heard some little aside somewhere when I was reading about that it might have even been Son House that just kind of made an offhand comment about, damn, he must have sold his soul to the devil. And,
yeah,
you don't know if that's true or not, but it's like the other parts
right.
you hear and you're like, well, why not? I could see that.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you listen to, there's one Robert Johnson song, he's constantly referring to the devil in some of his songs. And there's the lyrics in one of his songs, he says, "The hellhounds are on my trail."
Oh, yeah.
They're after him. And, so even in his own music, he's referring to this, indirectly to this kind of story.
It made me wonder when I hear that stuff, if he knew about it. It's like, did he hear these rumors and maybe kind of fire off a couple of things, not knowing that, it was going to lead into some wild years-long legacy about him selling his soul to the devil?
Who knows? That could have been his, hey, I'm going to latch onto this, and this is going to launch me into the next level, and who knows, but it's a pretty fascinating story. And of course, if you've ever seen the movie Crossroads, that's kind of based loosely on the story of Robert Johnson and his music. What's the Karate Kid's guy? Ralph Macchio?
Yeah.
He's actually in search of Robert Johnson allegedly recorded 29 songs. And in the movie Crossroads, Robert Johnson and I cannot remember the other actor's name, they're actually in search of this lost 30th song, which at the end of the movie, they found out it was not really a 30th song. The guy had lied to them, but they're in search of this lost song that Robert Johnson recorded and nobody has ever heard, which today would be worth, priceless,
Oh, yeah.
So just a incredible story, and just like this Pink Floyd connection to Floyd Council and Pink Anderson, and I probably need to brush up and refresh myself on some of the facts, because I'm sure more information has come to light since I first heard the story years ago. But it's an incredible story and a great connection to Central North Carolina.
Yeah, it really is. And one of the funny things about it is I have recently sort of become friends with a guy who does a horror movie podcast. And we basically kind of connected online, and we've shown up on each other's shows. And it turns out he lives in Sanford. So,
wow.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to tell him yet, but I'm going to get in touch with him. I'm like, bro, Pink Floyd is right near where you live.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I find it amazing, man. It's just the fact that it's so unknown, and it's one of those things in my mind, it's very important. Like, when you were saying, Floyd Council Jr. was taking you guys down to the graveyard to kind of show you where his dad might be buried, all I could think was my heart would have been racing. I would have been so nervous. And that's how I react to these kinds of things. It's like these types of people and connections, that's sort of my weird Elvis moments for me. It's like I have them constantly because these things are so important to me and so fascinating that for me, it is like meeting a superstar. I think I would handle meeting a superstar way better than I would a lot of these lesser known musicians who have had way more of an impact on me.
Well, Guy and I both were excited when he called me and said, "Hey, I made contact with Floyd Jr. He's going to meet us out there." Just like you said, I got excited. We're going to identify this grave, and we're going to erect a memorial, and we're going to get this story out, and those kinds of things. And it was sort of a letdown, if you will, even though I can take you to the graveyard and get you within a few feet of where he's actually buried. It was a little bit of a disappointment to not be able to pinpoint the actual grave. And like I said, I'm not kidding. This is in the middle. I mean, but the group that came down on YouTube literally had to take, chainsaws and sling blades and had to clear a path just to get into this graveyard. It's right beside the road, but at one time you couldn't walk through it without something to cut weeds with and trees and those kinds of things. So they cleaned it out enough where you could actually get into the gravesite, but it was a little bit of a letdown to not be able to pinpoint the actual grave. But it is what it is, especially when you go back that far in history. This was a little small African-American church. The church was actually across the street, and then the graveyard, was connected to the church. The church apparently went defunct, years later, and whoever was taking care of the graveyard just kind of gave up, and it got completely overrun. So it's kind of a shame on that end. But I don't know, who knows what technology may come in the future, and maybe one day we will be able to pinpoint, but right now it's virtually impossible.
Yeah, and in a weird sort of way, it's almost, for me anyway, I almost kind of like the idea that it can't be completely pinpointed. It's still it kind of allows a little bit of mystery, like Robert Johnson in a way. Right. It's like, it's still a little bit mysterious.
The strange thing about, the Floyd Council story and Robert Johnson you just mentioned, Robert Johnson's the exact same way. The church still exists. The graveyard is well maintained. There is a tombstone there for Robert Johnson, and I've been a couple times, and every time you go out there, they have to clean the tombstone off, every few days, because people come out and literally bring a chair and a guitar and will play the blues, and they'll leave guitar picks and all kinds of memorabilia. But they are not exactly sure. This tombstone is just in the general area, because you got to remember, this was way back in the early days, and this was a small African-American church with an African-American graveyard who, back in those days, when you're African-American, you didn't get the hoopla that some, other folks got when they passed away. And so they're not exactly sure exactly where he is, but family members have been out there and say, well, we remember he's right here near this tree, or whatever, somewhere right in here. So they just kind of picked a spot and erected a tombstone, but they're not sure exactly where he is in that graveyard. They're in the general area, but it's just like our Floyd Council. We can get you to the graveyard and get you to the general area, but other than that, the rest is a mystery or history.
Both.
Yeah, both. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, John, thanks so much for chatting with me, man. I appreciate it. This has been absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely, man. Anytime. You got my number. Like I said, if you or any of your listeners want to reach out, I'll be glad to meet you at the gravesite out there and kind of show you the general area. But anytime you want to talk music, man, you give me a call.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that for sure. And I really would love to come out and check out the gravesite. I'm not blowing smoke here. That is something I really would like to do. So if I get if the stars align in such a way that I can make it out there, I'll text you or ring you up and see if we can go out there and take a few pictures and just document the thing. I think that'd be cool. I'd love that. My kids will be bored out of their mind, but I'll have a great time.
Absolutely. Anytime you're ready to go, just let me know.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. Well, let me let you know that so this the actual interview, the episode that you'll be on, it'll probably be about a month or so before it goes up. But before it goes up, I'll give you an idea. I'll let you know what day it'll be on, and the day it's published, I'll send you a link, and that way you can go jump in there and check it out and see what you think. Super cool, man. I appreciate it very much. Yeah, no problem. Thanks so much. This is an amazing section of North Carolina history for me. Outstanding. I appreciate it, Dave. Okay, brother. Well, if you think of anything else you'd like to add, or if you'd like to talk about, send me a text and let me know, and we'll see if we can jump on and add that too, if anything comes up. Okay, sounds good. Thank you, John. Thanks, man. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Bye. Yes, sir. Bye-bye. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Piedmont Triad Podcast. I want to thank John Holly for taking a few minutes out of his day to share his expertise with us. Make sure, if you want to learn a little bit more about this, to go to the City of Sanford's website, which is sanfordnc.net. Also, if you haven't found our website yet, make sure to go to the PiedmontTriadPodcast.com and our social media, which on Instagram is at Piedmont Podcast or Facebook at Piedmont Triad Podcast. And as always, I want to thank Matt Smith and the Cowboy Spankers for letting us use their song Not Tonight as the Piedmont Triad Podcast theme song. Make sure you go to their Bandcamp page, Matt Smith and the Cowboy Spankers. Also, I want to thank my buddy Brian Falk for all of the great artwork he's done for me over the years. If you're ever interested in commissioning an artwork, a thing that you think might really be awesome and sweet and really need that high quality touch, Brian is the artist for you. You can reach out to him at his email, wellfalkna@gmail. Let me spell that for you. WELLFAULKNA@gmail.com. And as always, a big thanks to you for listening. Until next time, Piedmont.
She keep on moving. You're like the devil when the sun goes down. Stay away from me. Well, I'm too far gone. There ain't nothing here to see, babe. So you best just move along.